Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about some things that you can do as a Red Team system admin in the configuration menu. So we'll go ahead and hop down in there. Now, this isn't going to be a full walkthrough of everything that you can do here. As you can see, there is a lot of different options. I just want to go over some of the big points. First one being the first option here, My Company. This is where you're going to get all of your basic info in or changed. And first thing I want to mention about My Company and really all of configuration here is that all of this can be changed really at any point. So once you set this up, you are not locked in to working this way. This is meant to change and grow as your company does. So here in My Company is where we can get basic information down, like the name, address, if we ever move or change phone numbers. Also, your logos. And then first two options I want to talk about here. Enable verification requests with new entities and contacts. Essentially, when you enter a contact into RedTeam, it's going to send them an email verifying any of the information that you put in. If this box is checked, it's going to send that email automatically. You create the new company, the new contact, it'll send them the email saying, hey, can you check this info? If you don't want that to be done automatically, feel free to leave this unchecked. You will still have the option to send that verification email. Scrolling down, we get into some timekeeping and payroll settings. First one I like to point out, if you use a software or program called ADP for doing your timekeeping, we do have an ADP payroll export. If you use it, definitely check that. If you don't, go ahead and leave it unchecked. But then we're going to have two options here for job costing payroll. First option is to use actual payroll rates. These would be the rates that you have entered in the employee's profile. So when that employee puts in time, it'll use that payroll rate and apply that to your job costing. Second option is for labor categories. Essentially, you could set this up really however you want, but I commonly see it by role. Maybe you have 3 project managers. Each one of them actually get paid something different, but when you're job costing to a job, you can set up a labor category for project managers at one rate. Their time is going to be charged at the same rate with using labor categories. Like I said, you can set that up a bunch of different ways. That's just the general idea of that. Now, with labor categories, I do want to mention, we'll go ahead and go back, that those will be set up down here under labor categories. If you don't have that option turned on, this will be grayed out. So if you're trying to set these up and it's grayed out, just remember you have to go into My Companies and turn that on here. All right, next we have some project settings. Essentially, I like to talk about you have the option to allow user-defined project numbers. RedTeam has its own numbering system, but if you want to continue using your own, feel free to check that box. You'll then be able to renumber the projects once you create them. And then same thing with the commitment numbers as well. Next, we have some revenue options here. First one I want to point out is you have the ability to activate accounting periods. Kind of similar, like I mentioned, with labor categories. If you go back from here, over under accounting, you're going to have accounting periods. If you don't have that option turned on, that's going to be grayed out. So if you do want to set up accounting periods, just be sure to go into My Company and check that box. You can also set up the default revenue recognition model that you want to use. We have two different methods of recognizing revenue. We have revenue equals billing and percentage of completion. Neither one is a wrong option, and you can change per project which each one is. This is just setting up the default. You can have that selected to either. Percentage of completion, I think, is more of the gold standard of construction financials, but revenue equals billing is perfect on T&M jobs or small jobs too. Going down from there, we can look at credentials. And we actually have another video on credentials that goes into more detail. I just want to point these out. If you want to set up credentials here, you can. You can go in, create new credentials. We do have a nice default list for you. But if what you're looking for isn't there, you can create new ones here. And then you would go into the vendor's profile and apply those credentials to the vendors that have them. Like I said, we have a separate video that goes into a lot more detail into credentials here. So we'll go down a bit more. And I want to talk about roles and permissions. This is where you're going to be able to set up what each user, what each person can and can't do within RedTeam. This is done by roles and permissions, kind of as stated here. So if I click in here, it's going to open up with all of the roles that you have. Now, essentially how this works is each role has a set of permissions that allows what that user can and can't do, and then you're going to assign each user a role. So you'll assign all your PMs the project manager role, and then their permissions is dictated by what the role's permissions is. So for that example, we'll just go down to project manager we have here. And if you want to make changes to this, maybe they're wanting to do something that the system's not allowing them to do, but you would like them to, go to the tools icon next to that role and open. Edit is going to edit the role itself. Open will open the set of permissions. You can then navigate by menu options, or you can use the search bar up top to find that permission. And below roles and permissions, I want to talk about time and expense codes. These are going to be for indirect time and expense. There are things that are going to pop up that aren't going to be related to a specific job, and those would be indirect expenses or indirect times. In order to use either of those, you will have to have codes for that setup. So you can click the plus sign and create that. Is this going to be an indirect time or indirect expense that I'm wanting to create? You can give it a description. You could maybe make it, office lunch. If you buy lunch for the office, that would be an indirect expense. And then if you're connected to QuickBooks Online, you'll be able to link this to one of your chart of accounts in QuickBooks. Next thing I want to talk about, going over to the projects column, is going to be commitment forms. So this is where all of your subcontracts, purchase orders are going to be held. You can organize this by folders. We can see we have a folder for our purchase orders up here, a folder for our subcontracts. Yours may look a little different, but if you're wanting to make changes to a subcontract, we'll go to the standard subcontract agreement down here. Click the tools icon and edit. These same options will apply to a purchase order. But you're going to have a bunch of editing options here. We'll go down a bit. These are a lot of display fields. But first thing I want to talk about, it will be these workflow options. You have the ability to allow multiple commitments. So if you need to write more than one commitment per vendor per project, you can do that here. Also, allocate commitment value to multiple cost codes. So if you have more than one cost code on a commitment, check this box and you'll be able to do that within the project. And you have the option to require lien waivers. With this turned on, essentially what it's going to do is automatically create the claimants for you as you make these commitments. Scrolling down a bit more, you have your required credentials section. We talked about credentials a little bit before, but here's where you can make them required for a subcontract in this case, for any commitment, whichever one you're editing. You can see we have a list of required credentials on here, but if you want to add a new one, you would select from this list here. We could say you have to have a blanket agreement and then click add, and that would add it to my list down below. Now, essentially what that's going to do is cross-check this list. So it'll check this list against the list of credentials that the vendor has and tell you what's missing. If they're missing anything, it'll kind of flag it for you. You'll be able to fix it there. But then up top, it says the following credentials will be required in order to commit this commitment form. So it's going to stop you from committing the form if they don't have a required credential. Or you could change this option to execute, where it'll stop you from executing if they don't have the credential. So you do have two options there. And then I want to scroll down a bit more and point out the contract language section. If you want to edit any of your legal verbiage, here's where you can do so. We have a preamble section, terms and conditions, and a footer. Most of your verbiage should be in the terms and conditions section. If it's not, check the preamble, it may be there, just depending on how you have that set up. But if you click on either of those sections, we'll go to terms and conditions. What's listed there is going to pop up. This is our legal verbiage that we have. This works very much like a Word document. You can copy and paste from Word. It'll maintain its formatting, but this is also editable text here. So I can come in here and type in or make any changes right from here. And next thing I want to point out, below commitment forms is just going to be your proposal forms. So commitment forms, like I said, that's where you're going to edit your subcontracts, purchase orders. Proposal forms is where you can edit your customer proposals. Pretty much the same way you're going to change those. There's a lot less options there, but if you want to make changes there, here's where you can do it. The next thing I want to talk about is actually going to be company credit cards under accounting here. So if your company has company cards that they issue out to employees, you can get those set up here. Essentially come in, click the plus sign if you want to make a new one. And all you need to do is give it a description, which I generally recommend doing the last four numbers on the card and maybe the last name of the person whose card it is. But whatever kind of format you want to use for your credit cards, you can. And then you can select what account in QuickBooks it's going to go to. From there, once you create it here, you're going to want to go to that employee's profile where you can then apply it to that employee, and then they'll be able to select that company card when they are filling out expenses. And next thing I want to talk about is going to be your cost types and allocation rates. This is essentially overhead. You can set up default rates for your overhead. And this is going to go by your cost categories. So your labor, subcontract, material, equipment, and other. And each one can have their own allocation rate. You can see for us, we have a 25% overhead rate that we apply to labor and a 10% that we apply to subcontracts. If I wanted to make changes to this, I could click that tools icon and edit, and then change what that rate is. Now, this is the default per project that you're setting up here. And below that is going to be the cost categories. You can have multiple cost categories. You can actually have as many cost categories as you need if you want to create more. Just know that they do have to go to the same standard cost types, which would be subcontract, material, equipment, labor, or other. But maybe there's 3 different types of material or 3 different types of labor that you want to do. Keep them separated. You can do that here. Again, they will just flow into those main types that we have. Now, down below that, I also want to point out your units of measure. When you are making an estimate inside of a project, you're able to select a unit of measure for things. So if you're estimating material, you could say, hey, we need 75 barrels or gallons or pallets of whatever that material is. And here's where you can come in and create or set up those unit of measures if you want more than what our default ones are. And below that is going to be your cost codes. You could click into cost codes to manage your current cost codes. You could also create new ones from here. And that would be the plus sign up here. You could also use the tools icon to edit any of your existing ones. And below that will be the cost divisions. You can create and manage your cost divisions as well, just like your cost codes. And that's really all the main items I like to point out here in the configuration menu. As you can see, there's a ton more options than what we just covered. I just like to cover kind of the big ones on here. But thank you for watching, and we will talk to you next time.